Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm CEO of the Churchill Club. Pleased to be the one to welcome you this morning. On behalf of our co-hosts, TechNet and the Center for Democracy and Technology, we're happy to have Commissioner Michael Copps with us. Let's see, and also we need to thank the Open Internet Coalition for sponsoring this event. And of course, the Center for Internet and Society for opening their doors to us this morning. One very brief comment, and then I'd like to turn this over to Barbara Van Scheevik from the Center for Internet and Society to introduce Commissioner Copps. If you are tweeting, the Twitter codes are in your printed program this morning, and please do use hashtag Churchill Club so that everybody can follow along the conversation. And now I'd like to welcome Barbara up to introduce Commissioner Copps.
Thanks, Karen. Welcome, everybody. I'm a law professor at Stanford Law School and the faculty director at the Center for Internet and Society, and I'm really glad you're all here today. It's a really exciting time for internet policy this summer. As you know, the FCC has adopted the Broadband Plan and will start its implementation. The FCC is thinking about whether and how to adopt network neutrality rules as part of the Open Internet proceeding. And as if that wasn't enough to think about, in April, the DC Circuit Court of Appeals complicated the pictures by telling the FCC that it actually didn't have jurisdiction to do a lot of these things it was doing in this space. And so I'm really glad that Commissioner Copps is here today to talk about all these exciting issues. And there wouldn't be any better person to talk about it than Commissioner Copps. He has been a commissioner at the FCC for almost 10 years and has been one of the most aggressive fighters for an open internet that's accessible to all. And, you know, to just name a few of the many things he has done, he has been the first government official to identify the need for a US broadband strategy. He was the first to sound the alarm in around 2005, saying that there is a real danger that the US is falling behind. And, you know, now we are actually following up on this with the National Broadband Plan. So, you know, that tells you that in communications law, lots of things move quite slowly and you need a lot of endurance and energy to get this through. Same with network neutrality. You know, he's been a champion of network neutrality since when this topic came up. He opposed the reclassification or classification of cable modem internet services as an information service. That was the first step in the regulatory gamble that the FCC just lost in the DC Circuit Court of Appeal. And, you know, in his dissent, he actually predicted that this decision would put us all in a regulatory limbo. And, you know, now we can see that he was right. And I'm going to be interested in hearing what he has to tell about that. And, you know, then the next steps were the Internet Policy Statement, AT&T, network neutrality conditions in the merger with AT&T and Bell South, wireless network neutrality. And so, you know, you can see there is a really deep theme running through his commissionership. And I think the third big theme that I would like to mention is that Commissioner Copps really cares about getting out there and telling all of us about what's going on in Washington and hearing about what we have to say about it. And, you know, the one topic where this became most obvious was the media ownership proceeding, where Commissioner Copps and Commissioner Edelstein toured the country and held meetings all over the place to hear from everybody about the importance of a diversified media landscape in our country. And, you know, that at a time when people in Washington were really trying to keep this a debate that wasn't going to go public, to try to get this through the FCC without anybody noticing. And, you know, we can be really grateful to Commissioner Copps for making this happening. But that's about all I want to say, because it's going to be so much more exciting to hear from him personally. Thanks for coming, and we're looking forward to your talk.
Wow, what a splendid introduction. You don't hire out to do formal introductions, do you? That was great. Thank you for your very warm words of encouragement, and thanks, Barbara, for all the good things that you do in pursuit of open, dynamic, and ever more innovative telecommunications. It's a pleasure to see you again. It's a pleasure to be here at Stanford, home of the Center for Internet and Society. Many thanks as well to the Churchill Club, and Karen, and TechNet, and Betsy Mullins, and the Center for Democracy and Technology for giving me the opportunity to come out here and talk a little bit about the many currents and cross-currents facing the FCC as we begin implementing the National Broadband Plan. I'd be remiss if I didn't also express my appreciation to Markham Erickson of the Open Internet Coalition for his leadership in Washington and for the coalition's sponsorship of this event. His voice and the voice of others like him are so critical right now as we are in the midst of a pitched battle to protect the continued openness and innovation of the internet space from potential gatekeeper control by big telephone and cable companies. I've come to Silicon Valley to hear directly from the innovators and entrepreneurs who have relied on the openness of the internet to provide users throughout the country and around the globe with the powerful, innovative tools of the digital world. And I come here worried about what happens tomorrow if we permit access to the internet to become more tightly controlled by a handful of gatekeepers. This is not, as Barbara said, a new issue for me. It's something I've been warning about since I took the oath of office at the Commission almost 9 years ago. My job is to make sure the public interest, the interest of all Americans, is reflected in our nation's telecommunications policy. I realize that I have my perspective, and you have yours, and we may not always see eye to eye on every issue, or even agree on the proper role of government in tackling problems. Often in Washington, though, it is the coming together of interests, the confluence of interests, more than lockstep agreement on every single issue that delivers results. And I believe the preservation of an open internet is just such a circumstance where your interests, the interests of the Valley and high tech to foster opportunities for innovation and for business, coincide with mine of protecting the ability of consumers to chart, to the fullest extent possible, their individual online experiences. Of course, coming here to Stanford and the Valley and to other high-tech neighborhoods is always really a welcome opportunity for me to imbibe some of the intellectual energy and excitement and vibrancy that your community always seems to display. There is, and I really feel this, a very special energy out here on this latest American frontier. You know, almost a century and a quarter ago, the great historian Frederick Jackson Turner declared the last American frontier was closed, and how wrong he was. And I guess it just goes to show that even the brightest among us is capable of getting it all wrong. You are America's new frontier. I must tell you that it made a huge impression on me when I first came out here after joining the Commission and realized that your approach to problem solving wasn't exactly the same as Washington's approach to problem solving. And while in most respects that was good, in other ways it was, well, kind of challenging. In fact, it's as if we were sometimes speaking two different languages. In those earlier years of the digital age, communications between us hadn't even reached the analog stage. Behind the two-way lack of communication was a two-way lack of credibility and a two-way lack of trust, and that meant that your views were not being effectively represented in the nation's capital, and that our understanding of the world didn't have much currency or effect out here. I didn't like that part of what I saw then. And I've spent a lot of time since trying to open and feed meaningful lines of communication between us. The good news is that things have changed. By and large, your enterprises are significantly better represented in Washington now than they were back in 2001. The not so good news is that things haven't changed enough. Not nearly enough. So one reason for my coming out here this week is to emphasize the need to work harder at working together when our interests coincide, as they do right now. Wouldn't it be nice if our dialogue advanced at the same pace as our technologies advance? And unless we can figure out how to make that happen, many of the opportunity-creating hopes and dreams of the digital age are going to fall far short of their promise. And that promise is so huge, that potential is so huge. Getting broadband infrastructure deployed ubiquitously is the great infrastructure challenge of our time, and one upon which the innovation and creativity of Silicon Valley will ride. For openers, speaking of things that we can do together, Washington and the tech community have an urgent educational challenge to meet. We need to ensure that people understand how broadband is not just some nifty technology for technology's sake. It is important because it really is America's great enabler. This is technology that intersects with every great challenge confronting our nation: improving energy efficiency, halting climate degradation, creating jobs, improving health care for all of our citizens, educating our young, educating our old too, helping the disabled realize their full potential, creating new public safety tools for first responders, opening the doors of economic opportunity for all. The list goes on. But broadband connectivity is about even more than those things, because increasingly our national conversation, our news and information, our knowledge of one another will depend upon the internet. That is why I worked so hard for the inclusion of a strong civic engagement chapter in the Commission's recent National Broadband Plan. And it is why the Commission is looking so closely now at the future of journalism in our society. And we all need to be looking closely at that. Each of these problems, each of these challenges that I have just mentioned, has a broadband component as an important part of its solution. None has a solution without that broadband component. None has a solution without broad public understanding and support for getting this done. And none has a solution without Washington policymakers better understanding how great the nation's stake is in all of this. As I said, I think we're beginning to make some progress. The National Broadband Plan put together under Chairman Janikowski's leadership helped frame the issue in precisely these terms, and many of you helped put that together. But to get the public support needed and the policy support needed to really build out this 21st century infrastructure, we need to do much more. People need to realize that meeting the broadband challenge is really something important in their individual lives and for their individual futures. And they need to understand that a competitive nation cannot tolerate digital divides between haves and have-nots, between those living in big cities and those living in rural areas or on tribal lands, between the able-bodied and people with disabilities. And they need to remember that this nation has a long, long history of successful infrastructure building to draw upon. You know, if you course back through the annals of America's past, all the way back to the very beginnings, you will find that earlier generations met and mastered their own very great infrastructure imperatives, things that had to be done, things that had to be built if the country was going to move forward. So those generations built roads and bridges, turnpikes and canals, regional railroads and then transcontinental, an interstate highway system, nationwide electricity grids, and nearly universal plain old telephone service. They did this more often than not by working together. Private enterprise in the lead, private enterprise as the locomotive of our system, but encouraged by visionary public policy, supported by visionary public policy. That's how we built the place. But somehow, when we got to the bridges and roads and highways of the 21st century, broadband, we forgot those lessons. And we fell victim to this strange and totally unhistorical assumption that broadband would get built without any special effort, absent any enlightened public policy encouragement. And that business would build out even in places where business had no incentive to go. And that cost us a lot. We lost precious time, we lost golden opportunities, we lost jobs, we fell behind other countries, we paid the price in jobs, in education, in health, in energy, you name it. Change came, finally, in 2009. The opportunity to set a new course made one of its occasional visits to our land. I'm kind of a big believer in the cyclical theory of history where you have periods of reaction that last too long, and then you get some periods of reform, and then you go back to where you were before. So you really have to figure out how to take advantage of those precious opportunities for reform and seize the day when that happens. And we have a moment in time to do this right now. But speaking from 4 decades of experience in Washington now, it's not a slam dunk that it's going to get done just because great new people are at the helm. It is not going to get done without a qualitatively and quantitatively better, more intense, more supported effort on both your part and our part. Working smarter means pulling together more than we have, and we've started on the right road now. The new president came to town, and with Congress, in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, called for the development of a National Broadband Plan. That's something I had been pushing for from about the day I arrived at the FCC. And then it was really music to my ears when not only did Congress agree to do a plan, but they said, hey, let's put the FCC in charge of developing the plan. I never even thought the possibility of that happening, so that was great. And then what happened was we had probably the most open and participatory and in-depth proceeding at the FCC under Chairman Janikowski's excellent leadership that I had ever seen, maybe that had ever been seen at the Federal Communications Commission. He and our entire FCC team searched out traditional and, more importantly, non-traditional stakeholders of all types on the premise that if we're going to have a broadband plan for the American people, maybe it would be nice to be a broadband policy of and by the American people, too. Our broadband team listened and learned and analyzed and wrote and presented Congress with its plan in March of this year. And it provides the template the country needs. While each commissioner, myself included, would have probably had his or her own little different emphasis or timetable here or there in the plan, at last and at least we had a visionary policy needed to undergird and sustain a national commitment to this national infrastructure build-out. But of course the story didn't stop there. It only began there. And unfortunately, as if the basic job of following up with implementation isn't enough of a challenge, new roadblocks have been thrown in the way since then. And the one drawing most attention right now involves a fundamental challenge to the authority of the FCC. Just over 2 months ago, as all of you know, the Federal Appeals Court in Washington placed itself in the middle of the Commission's work in its now famous or infamous decision overturning our exercise of authority over Internet access services pursuant to Title I of the Telecommunications Act. And I'm not going to bore you with all of the arcane details of the Communications Act and Title I versus Title II, but you need to understand what is at stake. Over much of the past decade, the FCC took American consumers on a costly and damaging ride, moving the broadband transmission component of Internet access services provided by dominant phone and cable companies outside of the statutory Title II framework that applies to telecommunications carriers. And that was a major flip-flop from the historic and successful approach of requiring non-discrimination in our communications networks. Instead, to advance the interests of a powerful few over the interests of consumers and innovators and entrepreneurs, the Commission moved away from any real-world oversight by classifying Internet access providers as unregulated information services, subject to only very vague ancillary authority under Title I. I didn't buy it then, and now a federal appeals court has agreed that the aberrant Title I treatment doesn't work and doesn't fit. Unfortunately, this threatens to put important elements of the National Broadband Plan on hold, or even worse, to squander this otherwise golden opportunity, this moment in time that we have, to really be seriously about the job of building broadband and getting it deployed and adopted. I want to make just one other point in this regard, because I don't think people have talked about it enough. One of the arguments being made against the Commission's authority to move back to a Title II classification is that there have been no, quote, changed circumstances that are supposedly needed before we can legally do this. And I ask myself, no change in circumstances? It strikes me that the changes we have seen throughout the country and globally due to the internet have been little short of revolutionary. And I certainly don't need to tell this audience that the market for broadband technologies and services has undergone more than a few seismic changes over just the last decade. Back then, many Americans were still getting used to the internet, and independent internet service providers like AOL and CompuServe were the names of the game. Since then, it's a few huge access providers that have become the only real broadband game in town. Resellers and competitive local telephone companies have been driven from the field, and competition, as envisioned in the 1996 Telecommunications Act, in the internet access services market is simply inadequate. So we must now reflect these changed market realities in our policies and get back on course by treating internet access services, the gateways to the internet, as the telecommunications services that they are, subject to the most basic non-discrimination and transparency safeguards. Chairman Janikowski has announced his intention to launch a proceeding next week on the 17th at our monthly hearing to examine the options. And the options that he's presented are continuing down our failed Title I path, 2, applying the full range of Title II requirements and safeguards, or 3, a proposed third way that he has suggested of applying a limited number of fundamental principles of Title II to internet access service. Frankly, I would have preferred plain and simple Title II reclassification through an immediate declaratory ruling, accompanied by limited targeted forbearance from certain provisions, and just wipe the slate clean of all question marks. The quicker we can bring some sense of surety and stability to the present confusion emanating from the Comcast decision, the better off consumers will be, and I think the better off industry will be too. I nonetheless welcome the Chairman's efforts to bring internet access providers back under some form of Title II oversight to protect consumers and innovators from unjust and unreasonable discrimination. It was a travesty that we moved these providers beyond meaningful oversight in the first place, and it caused consumers, small businesses, and the country enormous competitive disadvantages. Where this brings us now is right to your backyard. Because our ability to safeguard an open, dynamic internet is under siege by some of the most powerful interests in the country, if we at the Commission fail to reassert our authority I believe we clearly have, then the days of the open internet will be succeeded by the age of the gatekeeper. Make no mistake about it, though, this is not going to be an easy fight. The big telephone and cable companies are doing everything they can to prevent the reclassification of internet access services. They have redeployed their troops in the FCC throughout Washington and in the blogosphere. And these opponents of classification make arguments that range from the frivolous to the nonsensical. My personal favorite is that somehow empowering choice and protecting internet freedom and allowing innovation to flourish by preventing special interest control over access to the internet amounts to a governmental takeover of the internet. That is such hogwash. But sadly, these simple and false messages are resonating. And as Speaker Pelosi warned just last week, the technology community needs to, quote, do a better job of educating members about this issue, end quote. Has it struck you, as it has me, that those who are most vocal in saying this is all about government wanting to regulate the internet, really, when you get right to the nub of it, are the ones asking the Commission to pick winners and losers and to choose existing models and business plans over new innovation and entrepreneurship? They can talk competition all they want, but the race to combine distribution with content spells economic constraint as clearly here as it ever did in our nation's history. I realize that some of you worry about anything that hints of oversight of anything that even touches the internet, even when we're talking about access to the on-ramps upon which your businesses rely. For what it's worth, I believe your future lies in openness and transparency. And I know the benefit for our citizens lies there too. Think about the alternative. If the FCC does not assert its authority to exercise basic Title II oversight, consumers can be denied access to your service, you would be denied access to them, and there won't be anybody who can do anything about it. That's the bottom line. This is not about government regulating the internet. It's about making sure that consumers and innovators, rather than a handful of entrenched incumbents, control our online experience. Allowing a powerful duopoly, in many places a monopoly, to exercise unfettered control over high-speed internet access does more than just create technology risks and economic risks. It poses a real threat, I do believe, to the future of our democracy. We are late, all of us, in understanding the profound civic implications of broadband as we begin to migrate so much of our national conversation and our national dialogue to the internet. America's future town square will be paved with broadband bricks, and it must be accessible to all, not the province of powerful gatekeepers, toll booths, and walled gardens. It must reflect the diverse voices of this diverse land. Sustaining democracy by effectively informing all of our citizens in the digital age goes to the core of what we are trying to achieve in the National Broadband Plan. And I am pleased that some Silicon Valley leaders are speaking out on this and encouraging experiments with new platforms and business models and technology tools to nourish news and information and journalism online. You know, an increase in technology does not by itself guarantee a better informed citizenry. A 2009 study indicates that as a country, we now consume in excess of 1.3 trillion hours of media per year. Yet the production and distribution of essential news and information have never been more in doubt. A recent Pew Center report shows a 50% decline in network news reporting and editing capacity since the 1980s, and a 30% drop for newspapers since just 2000. New media has not found the model to replicate online what has been lost offline. I'll say that again. New media has not found the model to replicate online what has been lost offline. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But there's a cautionary lesson to be learned from what has happened in recent years to our traditional media, and I think it's very relevant to where we are and where we're going. In less than a generation, a media landscape that had some degree of openness and competition and public interest value, like real journalism, for example, as its hallmark, was transformed into a market controlled by a handful of players, too often providing little more than infotainment and program homogenization. Newsrooms were shuttered, reporters taken off the beat and fired, investigative journalism was put on the endangered species list. Some try to tell us this is the natural result of changes in technology and the markets, but the facts tell another story. Truth be told, in the case of traditional media, newspapers and broadcasting. It was bad choices by the private sector through the heedless consolidation that saddled so many companies with so much unmanageable debt. And it was even worse choices by the government, especially the place where I work, the FCC, through our evisceration of the public interest protections that had undergirded the country's media landscape, that visited such harm on the American people, on our democracy, and ironically, even on the media companies themselves, who are probably now wondering if all of that consolidation was such a great idea. We cannot afford to have the same ills befall new media. Ensuring that all citizens have access to worthy media, to news and information, which I think our democratic dialogue absolutely requires, that is not a new challenge for our country. You know, you can go back to the very beginnings. You can read statements from Washington and Jefferson and Madison, who understood that a democracy depended upon an informed citizen. This was at the top of their minds when they put this country together, and they tried to figure out how do we get an information infrastructure built to sustain this new experiment. Can you really have a government over a vast country like the young United States already was? And they came up with the idea of postal subsidies to ensure the widest dispersal of newspapers, which was the broadband of its day, or the information infrastructure of its day. It was the second largest expense of the new government, I'm told, after national defense. So technology changes, but our democratic challenge remains the same. So this is the time to apply a healthy dose of silicon innovation and creativity to help us meet all of these challenges. You are involved in all of them. What you're doing impacts all of them. It is decision time. And I'm looking to you, and I believe millions of American consumers and citizens are looking to you, to be fully engaged across this whole wide gamut of issues. I had the honor many years ago of working for my friend, the great senator from the state of South Carolina, Fritz Hollings, and one of the many lessons he told me then resonates with me still. Decisions without you are usually decisions against you, he said. So remember that. So we're looking for a new level of commitment and activity and outreach and involvement. Big fight, tough odds, truly. Time away from your regular jobs? Absolutely. Game worth a candle? You bet. Realize, please, that the call you're hearing isn't coming just from me, or even primarily from me. It's coming from the promise of all the good things new technology can bring to the American people. It's coming from citizens who have been held back too long for centuries, but can now finally hope for better lives. It's coming from the spirit of those who came before us and figured out how to be successful builders of America. And it's coming from those who will harvest what we plant and what we nourish today. So we've got another frontier to tame. And I'm here to say that you, my friends, must be its pioneers. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear some comments or take some questions. First question.
Is it on?
My name is George Yang. In 1999 and 2000, I filed 4 patents in Internet and database area. Unfortunately, U.S. Patent Office still hold my patents.
I'm sorry, what's the last part?
My name is George Yang. I filed 4 patents in Internet and database area in 1999.
And 2000, yeah, that's all. Unfortunately, U.S. Patent Office still hold my patents. They don't want to give me a patent, don't want to approve my patents. They want hold my patents, let somebody else to do my job. Unfortunately, a decade passed, more nothing happened. My patent's still there, and the U.S. high-tech industry still keep at the level as 10 years ago. In the past 10 years, you cannot find any significant technology.
You cannot what?
Significant innovations technology in United States here. And another side, unfortunately, in past 12 years, I got 4 civil lawsuits. So far, I'm the loser. I strongly feel the resistance comes from the corrupted legal system, corrupted high-level government. Discrimination is the key issue. I'm a Chinese American. So I strongly feel, if I cannot get support from government, I cannot get support from legal system, I cannot get support from audience here, I cannot move forward. When I am frozen, I cannot do anything else. It seems to me nobody else can do anything either. So if we look at the United States high-tech industry economy, so it's a bad shape. So I just want the government support me, legal system support me, audience support me. Otherwise, that's very, very hard for me to make movement. Yeah, my question is why these people always fighting me for
Why these
like
people are what?
These people, all these people, local people here. I have been here for 10 years right now. If you look back my background, I spent 20 years at 6 universities. For the rest of 12 years, I worked for a company.
Okay, we got the question.
17 high-tech companies hired me less than 2 years. 16 temporary companies like restaurant waiters hired me less than 1 year.
All right, we wanted a question.
My question is why these people fight me?
Okay, I don't think that.
All right. I take the comment. I'm not that familiar with the problem. I would be open to hearing more specifically about where you're running into the roadblocks, what I can do about it. I frankly don't know, but if there's something going on that's actually really retarding our ability to move along with innovation, patents, and all the rest, obviously that's a problem.
My name is Tony Stein. I've come over from Berkeley, California. And my question is, I have a PhD in environmental engineering. And I also serve on a technical committee for the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. And I have great concern for children. And in particular, I'm here to ask you, as part of the FCC activities and policymaking, how we can get global analysis of the best practices and scientific evidence to update the standards and adequately measure the health impacts of wireless facilities. And we really need to repeal the Telecom Act for not only the reasons that you've listed, but also to repeal the ability to allow local authority and the preemption, get rid of the preemption that inhibits local authority to protect public health and the environment. And in particular, we have 10 cities throughout the United States that have signed resolutions and have been writing letters to the FCC to ask for this immediately. And we have 50 organizations that represent the public will. And my question is, what do you think is stopping the FCC from updating its standards on these very big issues of public health from the wireless locations of the facilities and other services that exist holding the facilities for wireless around children and around those that are sensitive to the RFA?
Well, what keeps us from doing that is that we largely have ignored the problem for over the last 8 years when we had a different theory and approach to government. First of all, I don't want anybody to say that I came out here advocating repeal of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, because that would get me in a lot of trouble, and I'm not advocating that. I'm advocating that we enforce the Telecommunications Act of 1996 and go back to the spirit of competition and innovation that I think was behind it. The emphasis on children and all, how do you go about that? I think the Commission is devoting a lot more time to this. If you look in the National Broadband Plan, I think there's a tremendous emphasis on health aspects of broadband relating to children, on the educational aspects of broadband, on media literacy, on digital literacy, on teaching kids. And I think priority number one ought to be to really develop a system of media or digital literacy is a better expression in this country from K through 12, so that in every grade, and I think you can make this interesting for every grade, kids are exposed to how do you use the tools of the new digital age, how can the tools of the new digital age be of help to you, how can they be a harm to you if wrongly used, and really do that. When you start talking about getting the information and standards and all that, I think maybe this is an area where there can be some creative partnership work between folks out here and the government and the relevant agencies of the U.S. government, certainly including our own, to try to develop a database and to try to get a list of what those best practices are around the world. The issue of preemption that you mentioned is always a difficult issue in our federal system of government. But it used to be, just speaking very candidly, I think when we've had Democratic administrations in the past, preemption was often used as a tool to kind of take away roadblocks and impose some needed policies. When the tide of power turned, preemption came a way for those in power in Washington to make sure the states didn't do anything really meaningful. We preempted to the federal government, not from the standpoint of doing something, but from the standpoint of doing nothing, really. So we have to always be working in that balance, and I think the 1996 Act really envisioned a more creative federal partnership. I don't think we've been very good at implementing it, where we can draw upon the states as laboratories and where they have the ability to go and do some new things and try them out, and also draw upon the states' expertise and the granular information they have that the federal government is always often lacking.
My name is David Dill. I'm in the computer science department at Stanford. I'm a professor. I was really pleased to see some discussion of civic engagement in the broadband plan and recognition of the importance of the internet to democracy. However, I was not very pleased about the section that was advocating internet voting for military voters, because I think it failed to take into account the very difficult computer security issues that are involved in internet voting. They weren't, I just read the document and they weren't discussed in any detail. I wonder if there's any way to reconsider that recommendation or look at the issue in more depth.
Oh, I think so, and I don't think what you saw there is a specific and fleshed out recommendation that we do this and go ahead without looking at the downsides as well as the upsides. It sounds like a meritorious idea if you can make it happen, but if it is going to have all these security problems or be tampered with or interfered with, then obviously we have to figure out a way to do that. So I guess the premise would be, what I'd like to come from is, this sounds like a good idea, how do we make it work, how do we make it operate, and does it have too many problems to keep us from going forward? And I think that's the stage we're at. I think this is a plan, this is kind of a blueprint, it's kind of an overview with a lot of meritorious ideas in it. Some of them are dependent on us, but a lot of them are dependent upon other agencies of government, on the Congress, on the White House. So what we have to have now to follow up is a lot of creative partnerships to vet these ideas, put them into the regulatory language or the legislative language that they're going to require in order to be implemented, and then move ahead with all deliberate speed to do that. But I don't think anybody is at the commission that I know of is just saying we need to do this and there are no problems attached to it. Certainly would not be my approach.
Commissioner, Maggie Shields from the BBC. You talked in your speech there about a pitched battle ahead, and about a pitched battle ahead, and about the telephone companies and the cable companies kind of girding their armies to fight this. What's the appetite among your fellow commissioners for a really big fight, and in Washington for a really big fight, given what's happened with the healthcare bill? You're ready and you're able.
Ready, able, and willing. I think it is decision time, as I said in my remarks, and I think now is the time that we need to be about this. We can't afford, obviously, just to string this out for months and months and months and just afford the other side all kinds of opportunities to create mischief and to spend money on expensive public relations campaigns and all the rest. But we've got to go from being on the defensive to being on the offensive and explain in terms that the average American can understand, and they can understand this, believe me, and many of them do understand it, and be about the job. But time is not our friend here, and that's why I've been saying, why don't we just do this and get over and done with in one fell swoop? And obviously there'll be opposition, and there'll be people screaming and shouting and all of that, but I think in the long run, companies... Thank you. I think companies will adjust to that. I think once the rules of the road are established, I think that brings a level of certainty that we don't have right now. And business can't operate with a question mark. People in this audience know that probably better than anybody else. So if you have rules of the road, even though they're not exactly maybe the ones people would want to have if they were running the ship, at least you have rules of the road, and we can go about and live with them. And I think at that point, a lot of these companies would probably be telling their friends in the world of the analysts and on Wall Street that we can do this, we can live with this will be fine, and they can. They have in the past, they can in the future.
The thing about these companies, though, of course, is that they have so much money to throw at this issue and negative messages really work with the public. How do you counter all of that? What's your kind of strategy, other than just coming to forums like this and asking people here to do the job? Because you're going to have to get tough as well, surely.
I like to think I'm already tough. I don't know. I think you fight fire with fire, and I think people who are going to be adversely impacted on the other side of the issue need to appreciate what an important moment this really is. And I don't think we're just trying to scream and shout for the sake of screaming and shouting. I think if we go down this, keep on this road of Title I, you're going to be dragged into court every time the FCC makes a decision. It'll be death by 1,000 cuts. And in the process, all of this time that could be used for creative innovation and entrepreneurship and the forward march of technology will be spent on trying to deal with these other ancillary and distracting issues.
Commissioner Copps, Don Means, the National Fiber to the Library project. My question relates to the goal in the plan for connecting every community in the country with a next generation level speed, a gigabit speed, to at least one anchor institution in every community in the country. And what you see as a implementation strategy. The goal just says to do that within 10 years, but it seems like that kind of action would do more to extend the physical network as well as give access to the experience of very high-speed broadband faster than anything for less. And so I'm curious about what kind of implementation strategies the FCC is recommending.
Well, I think first of all, it's a marvelous idea for many different places, unserved communities. Think what something like this would do out in Indian country or other places like that, or in the inner city, the rural countryside, just to hook people up and connect them to the communications infrastructure of our time. It's not only solves real problems, but it also provides the education and the appreciation for the technology, so there'll be more support for doing the build out to the individual residences and homes. So I think this kind of support for anchor institutions in schools or in libraries that you're talking about, or in post offices, or probably in several other kinds of venues is much to be desired. So I think we need to get a commitment to that. I think the plan obviously says this is a good idea. This is a commitment we'd like to make. So you have to get some sign off for that and figure out what the incentives are to build that. And there might be different incentives in different places. You might be able to use programs like the E-rate or something like that to do this, or perhaps even better, some new programs and new sources of support.
Congressional action, is that what you're suggesting?
I think that'd be nice. I think we have to look and see what programs there might be extant at the commission that can be used for this, but in the final analysis, it is a big commitment. It's an expensive commitment, and encouragement and authorization from the Congress is something always to be desired.
Hello.
Hi, Commissioner. I'm Patrick Olson. I'm an IS professor at another university, and it's not Berkeley, just so that I can get out of here. But it really isn't Berkeley. I probably couldn't get a job there either. This is just a thought that occurred to me, so it isn't meant to be a question to put you on the spot or anything like that. You mentioned journalism a couple of times, and I was forced, largely due to being at a faculty senate meeting, to talk to a journalism professor for some time over a recent occasion. And mixing that with having visited San Simeon and Hearst Castle this last summer, and also tripping over a Benjamin Franklin biography over at Mare Island Shipyard for some reason yesterday, I'm sort of wondering if the way that we rely on newspapers is because there's a content distribution tie-in there that evolved over centuries. And we're trying to keep that happening with the internet, and I think rightly so, and I applaud your good work. But I wonder if there's some sort of natural impetus there that we need to be more mindful of, or if we should just keep going and keep them separated, which, by the way, that would be my instincts. But you know, I still think we ought to run fiber everywhere so that you can have an access point.
Keep separated. Keep what separated?
Content and distribution. I personally think the way the internet's built, you pay for access and the content stuff has to be free, and you can't really mingle the two. And when you do, you run into what I think of as academic freedom problems. And I think that's kind of the work that you're doing here. But I noticed, as I said in talking to this journalism professor, that basically we're heavily reliant as a culture on newspapers, and the way they work is they're using their distribution system to pay for the journalists to go sit in the local municipal court, for example, and actually give you
the problem we have right now is we don't have a model to support the level and kind of journalism that I think our democracy requires. I, for one, believe that newspapers are going to be with us a long while yet. I believe newspapers are going to survive. I think the broadcast stations are going to survive. Realize at the outset that 85 to 90 to 95% of the news that we get continues to come from newspapers and broadcast television, even the news that you're seeing on the internet. That's where the locus is. We had the luxury, if you want to call it that, over recent years, past 40 or 50 years, to have kind of an advertising model that supported newspaper journalism. Wasn't something that we had before that, and it might not be something that's going to survive the advent of the internet. So I think the newspapers are going to be there. What's not going to be there is newspapers and broadcast stations with the kind of news content and the extent and depth of news content that they had before. I think the market will support the slimmed down Washington Post and the slimmed down newspapers all across the country. The market will support newspapers that don't have as many newsrooms and bureaus and reporters as they used to have. So they'll continue to go. In the process, you're depriving the American people of the depth and breadth of information and data that they need to make informative decisions about the future of their country. Nobody knows what the new model is going to be, or as I said, if there is going to be a new model. I'm delighted to see experimentation. There's wonderful examples of online journalism that are doing good and wonderful things, and more you read about them even on the front page of the newspapers. But it's nothing like the infrastructure that we had before. It's not the investigative journalism. So I think this is really, I think it's one of the biggest problems the country faces right now, and we have to figure out not just how media is going to look when it's all migrated to the internet, although that's a discussion we have to have, and I've been urging for a long period of time. That's not going to happen overnight, and we're going to have newspapers and broadcasts with us for quite a while longer. So what do we do about that traditional media and traditional journalism. And that's a problem that is not divorced from this community. It's not divorced from me as a policymaker or you folks in the high-tech world out here. We really need to focus a lot of attention on it. And what I want to do in some of my visits while I'm out here is talk to some of the leaders of the community out here. Some of them are beginning to speak up about the issue and recognize the issue and are supporting some solutions to it. But where do we go? And as I say, I encourage the innovation and the experimentation. It could be at some point that we will conclude that the only way for really vibrant news to survive is to have a little more public support for it than we have right now. In the United States of America, the per capita support for public media per annum is $1.35. Less than the cup of coffee that you bought this morning on the way into this place. In other countries, it's $40, $50, $80, $100. If we were matching that, we'd have some support for public media and public news. Anyhow, maybe that's a road we don't want to go down. I'm just saying we have to get away from this idea that anytime somebody mentions something like this, that somebody doesn't jump up on cable and say, oh, you're Mao Zedong or you're a communist or something like that. We have to take the offense and stop playing defense and recognize problems for what they are and propose some solutions. And there are probably lots of solutions out there once we get a dialogue like this going that nobody's thought of and that might be very worthy candidates for attention and implementation. But it's a huge problem. I'm glad you brought it up.
Hello, Commissioner. Thank you for being here today. My name is Susan Jacoby. I'm from San Diego, California, and I'm here today because there are over 1 million people petitioning a particular social media venue to enforce their own terms. And I'm thinking, well, speaking for myself, until I joined this petition, I really wasn't aware of the whole broadband issue going on in our country. Really not. And I consider myself fairly well informed on many things. But I'm thinking there might be an opportunity here. A lot of people are really angry about what's going on this particular social media and other venues as well. I think there might be an opportunity, and I'm wondering, what your thoughts are, to link kind of that grassroots discontent with, use that as an opportunity to inform more people about the situation with broadband, the distribution issue, and at the same time start that dialogue, that civic engagement about, well, what do we do about content? What we're petitioning for is for this particular venue to simply enforce their own terms. We don't, want to tell them what their terms need to be. We just see what their terms are. We're saying, hey, when we signed up, this is what we were signing up for. So there's that bait and switch feeling. I'm wondering if you have any comments along that line.
Well, without getting into any particular petition, there is no solution to a lot of these problems without the kind of grassroots education and mobilization that we talked about earlier. I've been through this before. When I first came to the commission was considering then Chairman Michael Powell's attempt to eviscerate all the media ownership rules that we had. How many outlets can a particular company own? And they were trying basically to do away with any limits. And I remember the mindset around the commission at that time was, oh, this is just inside the Beltway deal. I said, well, why don't we go out and have some hearings? They said, oh, God, no, that's just antiquarian. That's something like you did in the 19th century. Somebody said Copps was looking to have a whistle-stop tour on these issues. And I said, no, I think there is an interest outside of Washington. But they thought they could handle it inside the Beltway. Nobody was really interested in signal contour overlaps or the precise number of outlets a station could own. So we went out anyhow and did some hearings and went to hearings with a lot of grassroots and reformer advocates, folks like Free Press. And when Marvin was there in that group, did commend wonderful jobs in mobilizing the grassroots. And lo and behold, I must have gone, between Jonathan Adelstein and myself, we probably went to 50 or 100 hearings around the country, and some of these would be in places like this, some would be 10 times bigger than this, and we'd have 7, 8, 9-hour hearings with an open mic, hearing from the American people what they thought about that particular issue. And they had very definite thoughts, and they had very definite concerns, and they get it, and they understand it. And I think they're increasingly getting this issue of the open internet, network neutrality, of making sure there are no gatekeepers in control of their future. And the more we get that message out to them, I think the stronger they'll get in expressing their support, so that policymakers in Washington will have a better understanding of where they are. So I'm a big believer in that expression of grassroots support. This is a small d democratic problem, and it needs a small d democratic solution.
What time frame are you looking at for broadband?
Well, I think there are different, there's so many different parts of the plan. Some of these we should be doing right now. Some have already been teed up for implementation. We've got a lot of notices of inquiry and notices of proposed rulemaking out there. Some of them are going to be much longer, like remaking the universal service system or delving into the civic engagement part of the thing that I was talking about. But again, I'm possessed of this idea that the future is now. Seize the day. We got a window of reform that opened in this country in 2009, but when these cycles of reform come around, nobody knows how far the window is open. Nobody knows how long the window stays open, and if you don't take advantage of the time you have, then you'll end up making no progress. And these are huge, huge issues, and if we don't address them now, God knows when we will.
I think we've run out of time. I know that you have a lot of questions. Hopefully, Commissioner Copps will stick around a little bit.
I will do that. I will do that.
So I'd like to thank you very much, Commissioner
great. I
Copps,
appreciate it.
for
Thank
coming
you.
out and speaking with us, and also accepting the questions from our audience so graciously.
Very good.
I'd like to thank our partners, CDT, TechNet, Center for Internet and Society, and of course the Open Internet Coalition for making this possible. And thank all of you for coming. Have a wonderful morning.
Thank you.